Sarah Chen had always been different from the other engineers at Black Ridge Aviation. While her colleagues spent their lunch breaks discussing sports or weekend plans, she sat alone in the corner of the hangar, sketching designs on napkins and muttering calculations under her breath. At 28 years old, she had already earned a reputation as the quiet one, the dreamer, the woman who thought too much and spoke too little. The morning sun filtered through the massive hangar doors as Sarah wheeled her creation into the testing area. The aircraft looked nothing like the sleek fighter jets that surrounded it. Where others gleamed with polished metal and sharp angles, hers appeared almost organic, with unusual curves and a matte black surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The wings were shorter than conventional designs, and the body had an odd bulbous quality that made it look more like an insect than a bird. Marcus Webb was the first to notice. He stood up from his workbench, coffee cup in hand, and let out a loud whistle. "Hey everyone, come look at this." Chen finally finished her little project. One by one, the other engineers abandoned their stations and gathered around. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as the crowd grew larger. She had hoped to conduct her presentation quietly, with just the review board present. But word had spread through the facility like wildfire. "What is that supposed to be?" someone called out from the back. "Looks like something my kid would build with clay," another voice added, followed by scattered laughter. Sarah gripped her tablet tighter, her knuckles turning white. She had spent 3 years developing this design, working nights and weekends, pouring every ounce of her knowledge and intuition into this aircraft. The mockery stung, but she forced herself to stand tall. Tom Rodriguez, the senior engineer who had mentored half the people in the room, stepped forward with a smirk. "Sarah, I've got to be honest with you. This thing looks like it would fall out of the sky the moment it left the ground. Did you actually run any aerodynamic simulations, or did you just close your eyes and hope for the best?" More laughter rippled through the crowd. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but her voice caught in her throat. She had run simulations. Hundreds of them. The results had been extraordinary, revolutionary even. But standing here, surrounded by dismissive faces and cruel grins, all her confidence evaporated. "The surface texture alone would create so much drag," Tom continued, warming to his audience. "And those wings? Too short, wrong angle. This is basic stuff, Chen. First-year engineering student mistakes." Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "The surface isn't what it appears. It's a reactive polymer coating that adapts to air resistance. And the wing configuration is designed for maneuverability, not just speed." "Reactive polymer," Marcus repeated mockingly. "Is that what we're calling paint now?" The crowd erupted in laughter again. Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not here. Not in front of them. "Listen, Sarah," Tom said, his tone shifting to something that might have been mistaken for kindness if not for the condescension dripping from every word. "I know you worked hard on this, but sometimes we have to accept when an idea just doesn't work. Maybe aircraft design isn't your strong suit. Have you considered transferring to the testing documentation team? You're good with details. That might be a better fit." Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. 3 years. 3 years of sacrifice, of believing in something everyone told her was impossible. She had missed family gatherings, turned down dates, lost friends who couldn't understand her obsession with this project. And now, in a matter of minutes, it was being dismissed as a child's toy. A failure, evidence that she didn't belong here. "I think we've seen enough," Marcus said, turning away. "Come on, people. We've got real work to do." The crowd began to disperse, still chuckling and shaking their heads. Sarah stood frozen beside her aircraft, one hand resting on its strange, smooth surface. She could feel the complex systems hidden beneath that deceptive exterior, the innovations that no one here seemed capable of recognizing. "Maybe you should have stuck to what you knew," a young engineer named Jeff whispered as he passed by. Not quite quietly enough. "Girls usually do better with the software side anyway." That comment, more than all the others, made Sarah's jaw clench. She had graduated top of her class from MIT. She held patents in advanced materials and propulsion systems. She had earned her place here through skill and dedication, not because someone had felt sorry for her or filled a quota. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the ridicule still echoing in her ears and the hollow feeling in her stomach. The hangar had nearly emptied when Sarah heard the sound of boots on concrete. Heavy, measured steps that suggested military discipline. She didn't look up, assuming it was just another engineer coming back to deliver one more insult. That's interesting work. The voice was deep, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. Sarah raised her head and found herself looking at a man in an Air Force uniform. He was older, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His uniform bore insignia she didn't immediately recognize, but the bearing alone suggested high rank. "Thank you," Sarah managed, her voice still shaky from the earlier confrontation, "though you seem to be in the minority with that opinion." The man walked slowly around the aircraft, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't touch it, but his eyes traced every curve, every unusual feature, with the focus of someone who actually understood what he was looking at. "They laughed at the Wright brothers, too," he said quietly. "Called their flying machine a waste of time and money. Said humans were never meant to fly." Sarah felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. "You really think this has potential?" The man stopped his circuit of the aircraft and turned to face her directly. His expression was serious, almost grave. "Miss Chen, I don't just think it has potential. I think you might have stumbled onto something that changes everything." Before Sarah could respond, the hangar doors burst open again, and the testing facility director, Mr. Harrison, strode in with several other officials. His face was red and he looked furious. "Commander," Harrison said sharply, "I apologize for the confusion. This aircraft was not supposed to be presented today. Miss Chen brought it out without authorization. We have much more promising designs to show you from our senior team." The commander didn't even glance at Harrison. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah's aircraft, and slowly, a small smile began to form at the corners of his mouth. The silence in the hangar grew thick and uncomfortable. Sarah watched as Mr. Harrison's face shifted from red to an alarming shade of purple. Behind him, Tom Rodriguez and Marcus Webb had returned, drawn by the commotion, and both men now stood with expressions of confusion mixed with growing unease. "Director Harrison," the commander said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room stand a little straighter, "I appreciate your concern, but I've seen what your senior team has to offer. I reviewed those files on the flight here. Competent work certainly, safe, predictable. Exactly what I expected." He turned back to Sarah's aircraft, running his hand along the edge of one of the unconventional wings. "But this is something else entirely." Harrison stepped forward, his voice strained as he tried to maintain professional composure. "Commander, with all due respect, Miss Chen is one of our junior engineers. She's talented, yes, but this particular design hasn't undergone proper review channels. It hasn't been vetted by our senior engineering team, or passed through our quality assurance protocols." "Perhaps that's exactly why it's interesting," the commander replied. He looked at Sarah directly. "Tell me about the surface coating. You mentioned it was a reactive polymer." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This was her chance, possibly her only chance, to make someone understand. She took a deep breath and found her voice steadier this time. "It's a smart material system," she explained. "The coating contains millions of microscopic sensors that detect air pressure and temperature variations in real time. Based on that data, the material can adjust its texture within milliseconds, creating an optimal surface for whatever flight conditions the aircraft encounters." Marcus let out a scoff from somewhere behind Harrison. "That's science fiction. We don't have the technology to do anything like that." The commander held up one hand, silencing Marcus without even looking at him. "Continue, Miss Chen." "The technology exists," Sarah said, her confidence growing as she spoke about her work. "I adapted it from research being done in adaptive camouflage systems and combined it with pressure-sensitive polymers originally developed for medical applications. The coating doesn't just reduce drag. In certain configurations, it can actually enhance stealth characteristics by dissipating radar signals." She pulled up her tablet and began showing detailed schematics. "The wing design that everyone finds so unusual is actually optimized for something current aircraft struggle with: sharp maneuverability at multiple speed ranges. Most fighters are built for either high-speed interception or low-speed combat maneuvers, but they compromise on one to achieve the other. And yours doesn't compromise," the commander said. It wasn't a question. "The simulations suggest it shouldn't have to," Sarah confirmed. "The adaptive wing surfaces can reconfigure for different flight profiles. High-speed pursuit, tight radius turns, even near-hover capabilities in certain conditions." Tom Rodriguez couldn't contain himself anymore. He pushed forward, his earlier mockery replaced by defensive skepticism. "Commander, I've been designing aircraft for 23 years. What she's describing violates several fundamental principles of aerodynamics. The power requirements alone would be impossible to meet with current engine technology. Sarah felt her brief moment of confidence waver, but the commander spoke before she could respond. "And the propulsion system?" he asked Sarah, completely ignoring Tom's objection. "Hybrid," Sarah said quickly. "Traditional jet engines for primary thrust, but augmented with a distributed electric propulsion system. Small electric motors positioned along the wing edges and body, powered by a next-generation battery array that charges during flight through kinetic energy recovery." The commander's eyebrows rose slightly, like regenerative braking in electric cars but for aircraft. "Exactly," Sarah said, relief flooding through her that someone actually understood. "The system captures energy that would normally be lost during maneuvers and stores it. Not enough to power full flight, but enough to give the supplementary motors significant operational time. Those motors provide the extra thrust needed for the extreme maneuverability." Harrison cleared his throat loudly. "Commander, even if the theory is sound, and I'm not saying it is, this would require years of development and testing. We have designs ready to go into production now, proven designs from our most experienced engineers." The commander finally turned to face Harrison fully. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the hangar feel the gravity of the moment. "Director Harrison, 3 months ago, we lost 2 pilots over the Pacific. Good men. They were flying the best aircraft your senior team could design, and they were shot down by an enemy we couldn't identify until it was too late. The threat environment has changed. We're facing adversaries with technology that matches or exceeds our own, and we're doing it with conventional thinking." He gestured toward the other aircraft in the hangar, sleek and impressive but ultimately familiar. "Those designs are good, but good isn't good enough anymore. We need revolutionary. We need something our enemies won't see coming because they can't imagine it exists." The hangar had gone completely quiet. Even Marcus and Tom seemed subdued by the commander's words. "Miss Chen," the commander continued, turning back to Sarah, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you actually tested any of this, or is it all theoretical?" Sarah hesitated. This was the weak point in her presentation, the part she'd been dreading. "I've tested individual components. The polymer coating on small-scale models in a wind tunnel, the distributed propulsion concept using drones, the energy recovery system in a laboratory setting. But no, I haven't tested them all together in a full-scale aircraft." "Because they wouldn't let you," the commander said. It wasn't a question. "Because funding for experimental projects is allocated to senior engineers." Harrison interjected quickly. "Miss Chen is free to submit proposals through the proper channels." "I did," Sarah said quietly. 7 times over the past 2 years. The review board rejected them all without serious consideration. Tom shifted uncomfortably. He'd been on that review board for 3 of those rejections. The commander walked a slow circle around Sarah's aircraft one more time, his expression unreadable. Sarah felt like her entire future was balanced on whatever decision was forming behind those calculating eyes. Finally, he stopped and pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make a call. Director Harrison, I need access to your secure conference room." "Of course, Commander. Right this way." As Harrison led the commander toward the offices, Sarah caught a glimpse of the insignia on the commander's uniform more clearly. Her breath caught. That wasn't just any rank. This man had authority that reached far beyond a typical base commander. Marcus sidled up to her, his earlier mockery replaced by nervous curiosity. "Who is that guy?" Sarah's mind raced through what she knew about military hierarchy and special operations. "I think," she said slowly, "he might be exactly the person who could actually make something like this happen." Tom approached from the other side, his voice low. "Sarah, if this goes further, you need to be prepared. A project like this, if it's real, would mean pressure you can't imagine. Deadlines, oversight, people second-guessing every decision." "People already second-guess every decision I make," Sarah replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "At least this way it might actually matter." The minutes stretched into an hour. Engineers drifted back to their stations, but the atmosphere in the hangar had changed. Word had spread through the facility that something unusual was happening, and small groups gathered in corners, whispering and speculating. Sarah remained by her aircraft, one hand resting on its strange surface, feeling the texture that held so much hidden potential. She'd poured everything into this design, and now it was in the hands of a man she'd met only an hour ago, a man who might be her only chance at proving everyone wrong. When the commander finally emerged from the conference room, his expression revealed nothing. Director Harrison followed behind him, looking like a man who'd just been told his entire world was about to change, and he wasn't sure if he should be excited or terrified. The commander strode directly to Sarah, his boots echoing in the now silent hangar. Every engineer had stopped working, all eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. "Miss Chen," the commander said, "I've just spent the last hour on calls with people at levels of government I probably shouldn't mention. I've burned through favors I've been saving for years. I've made promises that will haunt me if this doesn't work." Sarah's stomach dropped. This sounded like the preamble to a rejection, the explanation for why, despite his interest, the project couldn't move forward. "So here's what's going to happen," the commander continued. "As of this moment, your aircraft design is classified. No one discusses it outside this facility without proper clearance. Director Harrison will see to the paperwork." Harrison nodded stiffly, his earlier objections apparently overruled by whatever conversations had taken place during that hour. "Second," the commander said, "you're going to have funding. Real funding. Not the scraps left over after the senior projects get their allocation. You'll have a dedicated team, a private testing facility, and access to resources that most engineers only dream about." Sarah felt her knees go weak. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her, especially not after being laughed out of a hangar just hours earlier. "Third," and here the commander's voice grew more serious, "you're going to have exactly 6 months to prove this works. Not a full-scale combat aircraft, I'm not unreasonable, but a functional prototype that demonstrates the core capabilities you've described. Stealth characteristics, maneuverability, the adaptive systems. If you can deliver that, we move to the next phase. And if I can't?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The commander's expression softened slightly. "Then you'll have tried something extraordinary and failed, which is still more honorable than never trying at all. But I don't think you're going to fail, Miss Chen. You want to know why?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Because 2 hours ago I sent your design specifications to a friend of mine, a man who spent his entire career evaluating emerging technologies for the Department of Defense. He called me back 20 minutes later, and do you know what he said?" The commander pulled out his phone and read from a message. He said, "This is either the work of a genius or someone completely insane. Either way, if you don't fund it, someone else will, and will regret it for the next 50 years. A stunned silence filled the hangar. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they were different. This time they were tears of vindication, of relief, of pure, overwhelming emotion. "Now," the commander said, his tone becoming businesslike, "let's talk about your team. You'll need engineers, technicians, test pilots. You get to choose them, but choose wisely. Pick people who can think outside conventional parameters." Tom Rodriguez stepped forward hesitantly. "Commander, I'd like to volunteer for Miss Chen's team." Sarah turned to stare at him, unable to hide her shock. This was the same man who'd publicly mocked her design less than 2 hours ago. Tom met her gaze, and to his credit, he looked genuinely ashamed. "Sarah, I was wrong. I let my pride and my assumptions blind me to what you were actually achieving. I've been designing aircraft the same way for 2 decades, and maybe that's the problem. If you'll have me, I'd like to learn from you." Marcus Webb shuffled forward as well, his usual swagger completely absent. "I'd like to volunteer too. I know I was a jerk earlier. I've got no excuse for that, but I'm good with fabrication and materials testing, and I think this project is going to need that." Sarah looked at both men, emotions warring inside her. Part of her wanted to refuse them, to make them feel the sting of rejection the way she had. But another part, the part that was already thinking about the massive challenge ahead, recognized that she needed skilled people. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford if she wanted this project to succeed. "Fine," she said finally. "But on my team, we question assumptions, not people. We challenge ideas, not each other. And everyone gets heard, regardless of their title or how long they've been in the industry." "Agreed?" Both men nodded quickly. The commander allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Now there's one more thing you need to know. This project needs a name, a code name for security purposes. I've already submitted the paperwork, and it's been approved." He paused, and Sarah could swear she saw something like amusement flicker across his otherwise stern features. "From this moment forward, this aircraft will be referred to as the Ghosthawk." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It was perfect. The name captured everything her design was meant to be, silent, unexpected, and nearly invisible until the moment it struck. The Ghosthawk, she repeated softly, testing how the word felt. It felt right. I'll be back in 2 weeks, the commander said. I expect to see progress. Real measurable progress. Director Harrison will coordinate the logistics of setting up your new workspace and clearing your team members for the classified aspects of the project. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Sarah one more time. Miss Chen, I'm taking a significant risk on you. Not just professionally, but in terms of national security. Don't make me regret it. I won't, sir, Sarah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. After the commander left, the hangar erupted into chaos. Engineers crowded around Sarah, some offering congratulations, others asking questions. A few still looking skeptical but intrigued. Director Harrison stood to one side, already on his phone, presumably beginning the long process of requisitioning resources and clearing security protocols. Jeff, the young engineer who'd made the comment about girls and software, approached slowly. Unlike Tom and Marcus, he didn't offer to join the team. Instead, he just said, I'm sorry. What I said earlier was stupid and wrong. I hope the project succeeds. Sarah nodded, accepting the apology for what it was. She didn't have the energy to hold grudges. Not now, when she had 6 months to turn an impossible dream into reality. That night, Sarah sat alone in the now empty hangar, a single work light illuminating her aircraft. The Ghosthawk. She ran her hand along its surface, feeling the texture of the polymer coating that held so much promise. 6 months ago, this had been just sketches and calculations. 3 hours ago, it had been the target of ridicule and dismissal. Now it was a classified military project with funding, support, and a name that sent shivers down her spine. She pulled out her tablet and began making lists. There was so much to do. Component testing to finalize, systems to integrate, 1,000 small problems to solve before they could even think about a test flight. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavy but not unwelcome. Sarah thought about the commander's words. 6 months to prove it worked. 6 months to validate 3 years of research and design. 6 months to show everyone who'd laughed at her that sometimes the impossible was just the difficult, waiting for someone brave enough to try. She looked up at the Ghosthawk, its unusual silhouette casting strange shadows in the dim light. Okay, she whispered to it as if the aircraft could hear her. Let's show them what we can do. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that this was crazy, that the odds of success were impossibly small, that she was setting herself up for an even more spectacular failure than before. But Sarah had never listened to that voice before, and she wasn't about to start now. The first 3 months passed in a blur of 18-hour days, countless setbacks and small victories that felt like miracles. Sarah's team had grown to 15 people, a mix of engineers, material specialists, and computer scientists, all working in a newly constructed facility that had been built in record time in a remote section of the Black Ridge complex. The workspace was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Walls lined with monitors displaying real-time data streams, a full-scale wind tunnel capable of simulating conditions from sea level to 70,000 feet. Manufacturing equipment so precise it could produce components with tolerances measured in microns. It was every engineer's dream. And it was all focused on making the Ghosthawk real. But having resources and using them effectively were two different things. The polymer is delaminating at high temperatures, Marcus announced one morning, holding up a test panel that looked like it had been through a furnace. We hit Mach 0.9 in the simulation, and the coating started peeling away in sheets. Sarah leaned over the test results, her eyes scanning the data with growing frustration. This was the 4th thermal management problem they'd encountered in as many weeks. What if we modify the bonding agent? Add a ceramic substrate layer? Already tried it, Tom said from across the room. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes that matched everyone else's. The ceramic adds too much weight. We lose the power-to-weight ratio that makes the whole design work, Sarah wanted to scream. For every problem they solved, 2 more appeared. The adaptive wing surfaces worked beautifully in isolation, but caused unexpected turbulence when integrated with the fuselage. The distributed propulsion system functioned perfectly until they tried to coordinate all the motors simultaneously. at which point the control software crashed. The energy recovery system worked, but not efficiently enough to justify its weight. "We're running out of time," Jennifer Park, their lead computer scientist, said quietly. She was one of the few team members who'd been genuinely supportive from the beginning, and Sarah valued her input more than almost anyone's. "The commander returns in 2 weeks for the progress review. We need to have something functional to show him." "We have functional components," Sarah said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "The stealth coding works. The wing design produces the maneuverability we predicted. The propulsion concept is sound. But nothing works together," Tom said gently. "Sarah, I know this is hard to hear, but maybe we need to scale back our ambitions. Pick the 2 or 3 most important innovations and perfect those. We can't revolutionize everything about aircraft design in 6 months." Sarah felt something hard and cold settle in her stomach. Tom was being reasonable, logical. He was probably even right. But accepting his advice felt like admitting defeat. Like proving all the doubters correct. "No," she said firmly. "This project works as a complete system or not at all. Every component is designed to work with the others. If we start removing pieces, the whole thing falls apart." Marcus exchanged a glance with Tom, and Sarah caught it. That look said everything. They thought she was being stubborn, prideful, refusing to accept reality. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was pushing too hard, asking too much. That night, Sarah stayed in the lab long after everyone else had left. She sat in front of a computer screen, running simulation after simulation, tweaking variables, adjusting parameters, searching for the solution that would make everything click into place. Around 2 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Miss Chen, this is Commander Stevens. I wanted you to have my direct contact. I know the pressure you're under. Remember, progress doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like learning what doesn't work. I have faith in you." Sarah stared at the message for a long time. The commander had given her his personal number. That gesture of trust meant more than all the funding and resources combined. It meant he believed in her, even when she was starting to doubt herself. She looked up at the partial prototype of the Ghosthawk suspended in the testing bay. It was maybe 40% complete, a skeleton of the aircraft it would eventually become, bristling with sensors and temporary components. It looked fragile, unfinished, impossible. "What am I missing?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer came to her 3 days later, not in a moment of inspiration, but in a moment of desperation. They were conducting another integration test, trying once again to make the adaptive wing surfaces respond properly to the distributed propulsion system. The test was failing, just like the previous dozen attempts. Sarah watched the data scroll across her screen, seeing the same patterns of cascading errors she'd seen before. The wing surfaces were fighting the propulsion system, each trying to optimize for different flight characteristics simultaneously. It was like watching 2 expert pilots trying to fly the same plane using different control sticks. And suddenly, she understood. "We're doing this backward," she announced, her voice cutting through the frustrated murmurs of her team. "We've been trying to program the systems to work together, but we're treating them as separate components that need to cooperate. That's wrong. They shouldn't be separate systems at all." Jennifer looked up from her computer. "What do you mean?" "The wing surfaces, the propulsion motors, the energy recovery, the stealth coding, all of it. It's not different systems. It's one system with multiple functions. We need unified control architecture." Tom frowned. "Sarah, that would require completely rewriting the control software from scratch." "We don't have time for that. We don't have time not to," Sarah countered. "Jennifer, how long would it take you to build a neural network that could learn to optimize all the systems simultaneously instead of running separate programs for each component?" Jennifer's eyes widened. "A learning system? That could adapt in real time? Sarah, that's incredibly complex, and there's no guarantee it would work. But it might," Sarah said, "and right now might is better than what we have." The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Sarah's life. The team split into groups, some continuing to refine the physical components while Jennifer, Sarah, and 2 other programmers worked around the clock on the new control system. They built a neural network that could process input from hundreds of sensors simultaneously, learning patterns and adapting its control of the various systems to achieve optimal performance. It was revolutionary. It was also completely untested. The day before the commander's scheduled visit, they were ready for their first full integration test. The prototype still wasn't complete, it couldn't fly yet. But they could test whether the unified control system could manage all the components working together. Sarah's entire team gathered in the testing bay, along with Director Harrison and several other Blackridge officials. Everyone knew this was the moment that would determine whether the Ghosthawk lived or died. "Run the simulation," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Jennifer initiated the program. For a moment, nothing happened. Then all at once, every system came online. The polymer coating rippled like living skin. The wing surfaces adjusted their angles in perfect coordination. The distributed propulsion motors hummed to life, their output balancing automatically with the main engines. The energy recovery system captured and stored power from the simulated airflow. Data flooded the screens. Sarah watched the numbers, hardly daring to breathe. The systems weren't fighting each other anymore. They were dancing. A perfectly choreographed performance, where every component enhanced the others. Power. Efficiency is up 32%, someone called out. Projected. Maneuverability exceeds design specifications. By 18%, another voice added. Stealth. Profile holding stable across all radar. Frequencies. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. It was working. After 3 months of failure and frustration, it was actually working. Tom walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You were right to push." "I'm sorry I doubted you." Sarah shook her head. "You all did it." This wasn't just me. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't entirely true. She'd been the one to hold firm when everyone wanted to compromise. She'd been the one to see the solution when everyone else was ready to give up. That knowledge filled her with a quiet pride she'd never experienced before. The next morning, Commander Stevens arrived exactly on schedule. Sarah's team had worked through the night preparing their presentation, assembling data, creating visualizations that would demonstrate everything the Ghosthawk could do. The commander walked into the testing bay, his expression as unreadable as ever. He looked at the partial prototype, at the screens displaying test results, at the exhausted but hopeful faces of Sarah's team. "Show me," he said simply. Sarah's presentation lasted 2 hours. She walked Commander Stevens through every system, every innovation, every problem they'd encountered and solved. She showed him simulation results, component tests, and finally, the full system integration that had worked for the first time just 24 hours earlier. The commander asked questions. Sharp, probing questions that revealed his deep understanding of aerospace engineering and military applications. He wanted to know about failure modes, backup systems, manufacturing scalability, pilot training requirements. Sarah answered each question as honestly as she could, admitting when they didn't yet have solutions but explaining their plans to find them. When she finished, the commander stood silently for several minutes, studying the data on the screens. The entire room held its breath, waiting for his verdict. "You've exceeded my expectations," he finally said. "I asked for a functional prototype demonstrating core capabilities. What you've delivered is the foundation for something that could change air superiority for the next 50 years. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. Tom and Marcus actually hugged each other. Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. "However," the commander continued, and the room went silent again, "what you have here is still theoretical. Simulation results are one thing. Real-world performance is another. Before we can move forward with full-scale production, we need to see this aircraft actually fly." "We understand," Sarah said. "We've already begun planning for flight testing. With proper funding and support, we estimate another 9 months to complete a flight-ready prototype." The commander shook his head. "You have 3 months." The room erupted in protest. Tom stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, that's not possible. We need to complete the airframe, integrate the flight control systems, conduct ground testing, obtain certification for test flights. Even working at our current pace, 9 months is aggressive." 3 months, the commander repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "I've just received intelligence about a new threat system our adversaries are developing. If the reports are accurate, our current aircraft will be vulnerable within 18 months. The Ghosthawk isn't just an innovation anymore, it's a necessity." He pulled out a folder marked with red classification stamps and handed it to Sarah. "These are the specifications for the threat system. Study them. If your aircraft can counter this, you'll have all the support you need for full production. If it can't, we're back to the drawing board and we don't have time for that." After the commander left, Sarah opened the folder. What she read made her blood run cold. The enemy system was a next-generation integrated air defense network, combining radar, infrared, and acoustic detection with artificial intelligence coordination. It could track and target multiple aircraft simultaneously, adapting its tactics in real time based on observed flight patterns. Everything conventional aircraft relied on, speed, altitude, evasive maneuvers, would be predictable to this system. But the Ghosthawk's adaptive capabilities might be just unpredictable enough to slip through. Might be. That uncertainty terrified her. The next 3 months made the previous months look relaxed by comparison. Sarah instituted a rotating schedule so someone was always working on the aircraft, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They brought in additional specialists, fabricators who could work with exotic materials, avionics experts who understood flight control systems at the deepest level. The Ghosthawk began to take shape. The strange bulbous body was enclosed, its polymer coating applied in layers so thin they were measured in nanometers. The short wings were attached, their adaptive surfaces controlled by thousands of tiny actuators. The distributed propulsion motors were integrated, each one connected to the neural network that would coordinate their operation. Problems continued to appear. A manufacturing defect in one of the wing actuators caused a cascading failure that damaged an entire control surface. They had to rebuild it from scratch, losing 2 weeks. The main engine mountings cracked during stress testing, requiring a complete redesign. The neural network had to be retrained 3 times because it kept optimizing for fuel efficiency instead of survivability. Sarah lost weight. She stopped bothering to go home most nights, sleeping on a cot in her office for a few hours before returning to work. Her team was running on caffeine and determination, everyone knowing they were attempting something that shouldn't be possible in the time they had. 6 weeks before the scheduled flight test, Jennifer pulled Sarah aside. "We have a problem. A big one." They walked to Jennifer's workstation, where lines of code scrolled across multiple monitors. "The neural network is learning faster than we anticipated. It started developing emergent behaviors, ways of controlling the aircraft that we didn't program into it." "That sounds like a good thing," Sarah said slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's dangerous. We can't fully predict what it will do in a real flight scenario. It might make decisions that seem optimal to the algorithm, but are unsafe for a human pilot." Sarah stared at the code, seeing patterns but not fully understanding the complex mathematics underlying them. "Can we add constraints? Limit what decisions it can make?" "We can try. But the more constraints we add, the less adaptive the system becomes. We risk losing the exact capability that makes the Ghosthawk special." It was an impossible choice. Trust the system they'd built, or try to control it and potentially cripple its effectiveness. Sarah thought about the commander's words, about the threat they were trying to counter, about pilots who might die if they sent up conventional aircraft against an enemy with superior technology. "We trust it," she decided, "but we test it thoroughly on the ground first. Every possible scenario we can simulate. And our test pilot needs to understand they're flying an aircraft that might do unexpected things." Finding a test pilot turned out to be easier than expected. Captain Rebecca Shaw volunteered the moment she heard about the project. She was 34, an experienced combat pilot with thousands of flight hours, and she had a reputation for being fearless to the point of recklessness. "I've been flying the same aircraft designs with minor variations for my entire career," she told Sarah during their first meeting. "If you're building something actually new, I want to be the first person to fly it." Sarah liked her immediately. Rebecca had the same fire in her eyes that Sarah saw in the mirror, the same hunger to prove that impossible things could be done. They spent weeks preparing Rebecca for the Ghosthawk's unique characteristics. She trained on simulators, learning how the adaptive systems would respond to different inputs. She studied the neural network's decision-making patterns, understanding how it would assist and sometimes override her commands in the interest of optimal performance. "It's like having a co-pilot who thinks faster than I do," Rebecca said after one particularly intense simulation session. "I'm not sure if that's awesome or terrifying." "Both," Sarah admitted. "Definitely both." 3 days before the scheduled test flight, Sarah was working late in the hangar when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Director Harrison looking older and more tired than she remembered. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "Several apologies, actually." Sarah set down the tablet she'd been holding. "Sir? When you first started here, I didn't take you seriously. I saw a young woman with big ideas and assumed she'd learn to be more practical with experience. When you submitted your proposals, I was one of the people who rejected them without proper review. I told myself it was because we had limited resources, but the truth is I was threatened by your vision. He walked closer to the Ghosthawk, reaching out but not quite touching its surface. I've been in this industry for 32 years. I thought I understood what was possible and what wasn't. You proved me wrong in every way that matters. This aircraft, this project, it's extraordinary, and I'm sorry I couldn't see that until someone else forced me to look. Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd spent so long being angry at Harrison, at Tom, at Marcus, at everyone who'd dismissed her. Hearing this apology now felt surreal. Thank you, she finally managed. That means a lot, Harrison nodded. The test flight in 3 days, it's going to be watched by people at the highest levels of government. The president has been briefed on this project. If it succeeds, you'll have resources beyond anything we've discussed. If it fails, I know, Sarah said softly. If it fails, I'll have wasted millions of dollars and months of time on something that didn't work. I'll probably never work in aerospace again. That's not what I was going to say, Harrison replied. If it fails, you'll still have accomplished something remarkable. You'll have pushed the boundaries of what we thought possible. That has value, regardless of the outcome. After Harrison left, Sarah climbed up onto the scaffolding surrounding the Ghosthawk. She sat on a platform near the cockpit, looking at the aircraft she'd spent nearly 4 years of her life creating. In 3 days, it would either validate everything she'd believed or prove that her critics had been right all along. She thought about Captain Shaw, who would be trusting her life to systems that had never been tested in real flight. She thought about her team, who'd sacrificed so much to make this happen. She thought about the commander, who'd taken a career-defining risk on an unknown engineer with an imposse. The morning of the test flight dawned clear and cold. Sarah arrived at the remote testing facility at 4 a.m. to find she wasn't the first one there. Her entire team had shown up early, along with Director Harrison, military observers, and several people in civilian clothes who carried themselves with the unmistakable authority of government officials. The Ghosthawk sat on the runway, looking even stranger in the dawn light than it had in the hangar. Its matte black surface seemed to swallow the light, and its unusual proportions made it look like something from another world. Sarah noticed several of the military observers taking photos with their phones, probably violating a dozen security protocols but unable to resist documenting this moment. Captain Rebecca Shaw arrived at 5, already dressed in her flight suit. She walked straight to Sarah, and they stood together looking at the aircraft they'd both invested so much in. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. Rebecca grinned. "Like I'm about to either make history or become a really interesting footnote in aviation disasters. Either way, it's going to be one hell of a ride." "You don't have to do this," Sarah said quietly. "We could delay, run more simulations, add more safety protocols." "We could," Rebecca agreed. "But we won't. This bird is as ready as it's going to be, and so am I. Let's see what she can do." The pre-flight checks took 2 hours. Every system was tested and retested. The neural network was initialized and confirmed operational. The adaptive surfaces responded correctly to diagnostic commands. The distributed propulsion motors spun up without issues. Everything looked perfect, which somehow made Sarah more nervous rather than less. Commander Stevens arrived at 7, accompanied by 2 other high-ranking officers Sarah didn't recognize. He walked directly to her, his expression serious. "Miss Chen, I've just been informed that we have international observers watching this test via satellite feed. If the Ghosthawk performs as expected, you'll be answering questions from congressional committees and foreign intelligence agencies for months. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah almost laughed. After everything she'd been through, testimony before Congress seemed almost mundane. "I'm prepared to show them what the Ghosthawk can do. After that, I'll deal with whatever comes." The commander allowed himself a small smile. "Good answer." At 8 o'clock, Rebecca climbed into the cockpit. Sarah helped secure her harness, checking every connection twice. As she worked, Rebecca reached out and squeezed her hand. "Hey," Rebecca said softly. "This is going to work. I can feel it. This aircraft wants to fly." Sarah wanted to believe her. She wanted to share that confidence. But all she could think about was the 1,000 things that could go wrong, the systems that might fail, the calculations that might have been incorrect. "Bring her back safe," Sarah whispered. "Always do." Rebecca replied with a wink. Sarah climbed down from the cockpit, and the canopy sealed with a hydraulic hiss. She joined her team in the observation bunker, a reinforced structure half a mile from the runway with walls lined with monitors showing every possible angle, and data stream from the Ghosthawk. All systems green, Jennifer reported from her station. Neural network is stable. Rebecca has full control. Through the observation window, Sarah watched the Ghosthawk's engines begin their startup sequence. The sound was different from conventional aircraft, quieter but with an odd harmonic quality that made her think of wind whistling through mountain passes. Rebecca's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional. Tower Ghosthawk requesting clearance for takeoff. Ghosthawk, you are cleared for takeoff. Good luck, Captain. Copy that, Tower. Ghosthawk rolling. The aircraft began to move down the runway, slowly at first, then faster, accelerating with a smoothness that Sarah found almost unnatural. The distributed propulsion motors provided such even thrust that there was none of the shaking or vibration typical of conventional takeoffs. 50 miles per hour, 70, 90. The Ghosthawk reached rotation speed, and Sarah held her breath as Rebecca pulled back on the controls. The aircraft lifted off the runway with a grace that made Sarah's eyes water. There was no struggle, no fighting against gravity. The Ghosthawk simply decided to fly, and the air seemed to welcome it. Gear up, Rebecca reported. Systems nominal. This is incredible. The control response is unlike anything I've ever experienced. For the first hour, Rebecca conducted basic flight tests. Straight and level flight, gentle turns, altitude changes. Everything performed exactly as predicted. Better than predicted, actually. The neural network was making micro-adjustments to the adaptive surfaces and propulsion systems, optimizing performance in ways the simulations hadn't fully captured. Okay, Rebecca's voice came through the speakers, now tinged with excitement. Request permission to test maneuverability parameters. Commander Stevens looked at Sarah. She nodded and he keyed his microphone. Permission granted, Ghosthawk. Show us what you can do. What happened next would be analyzed and debated by aerospace engineers for decades. Rebecca put the Ghosthawk through maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible. Turns at speeds that would have torn the wings off a conventional aircraft. Rapid altitude changes that should have stalled the engines. Rolls and loops that combined elements of fighter combat and aerobatics in ways no one had seen before. The neural network was performing perfectly, adapting the aircraft's configuration in real time to maintain optimal performance. The polymer coating rippled like living skin, adjusting to changing airflow. The wing surfaces morphed their shape dozens of times per second. The distributed motors fired in complex patterns that provided thrust vectoring no mechanical system could match. This is insane, Tom whispered, staring at the data streaming across his monitor. She's pulling maneuvers that would black out any human pilot. But the G-forces are being distributed across the airframe in ways that keep them manageable. Marcus pointed at his screen. Look at the stealth profile. Even during aggressive maneuvers, the radar cross-section is staying below threshold. It's like watching a ghost, the Ghosthawk. The name had never seemed more appropriate. After 2 hours of testing, Rebecca brought the aircraft in for landing. The touchdown was so smooth that Sarah barely saw the moment when the wheels contacted the runway. The Ghosthawk rolled to a stop exactly where it was supposed to, and Rebecca shut down the engines. The observation bunker erupted in cheers. Sarah's team was hugging each other, crying, laughing, releasing months of tension in one explosive moment. Even the military observers were clapping, their professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine amazement. Commander Stevens approached Sarah, and for the first time since she'd met him, he was actually smiling. Miss Chen, I've been in the military for 33 years. I've seen every advanced weapon system we've developed in that time. What you've created here is the most significant advancement in air superiority I've ever witnessed. Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. The debrief lasted 4 hours. Rebecca described every moment of the flight in detail, her enthusiasm infectious. The data analysis showed that the Ghosthawk had exceeded performance specifications in every category. Most importantly, simulations run against the enemy threat system showed that the aircraft's unpredictable adaptability would make it extremely difficult to target and track. When can we begin production? One of the government officials asked. Commander Stevens looked at Sarah. Miss Chen, this is your design. What's your recommendation? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she'd been working toward for 4 years, but now that it was here, she felt the full weight of what it meant. The Ghosthawk would be built in numbers, flown in combat, used in situations where lives depended on its performance. We need to build 3 more prototypes, she said carefully. Test them under different conditions with different pilots. Make sure the neural network's learning is consistent and safe across multiple aircraft. Train a cadre of pilots who understand how to work with the adaptive systems. Then we can move to full production. The official nodded. Reasonable. What timeline are we looking at? 18 months for full production readiness, Sarah said. Maybe less if we can parallelize some of the work. Make it 12, the official replied. We'll give you whatever resources you need, but we need these aircraft operational as soon as possible. Over the next year, Sarah watched her creation transform from a single prototype into a fleet. The Ghosthawk program became one of the most well-funded and closely monitored projects in military aviation. Sarah found herself briefing generals, testifying before Congress, and fielding calls from foreign allies who wanted to know if they could purchase the aircraft. She built a larger team, training new engineers in the principles that made the Ghosthawk work. Tom became her deputy director, managing the day-to-day operations while Sarah focused on next-generation improvements. Marcus headed the manufacturing division, ensuring quality control across multiple production facilities. Jennifer led the artificial intelligence team, continuously refining the neural network based on data from test flights. Captain Rebecca Shaw became the lead instructor for Ghosthawk pilots, training a new generation of aviators in how to fly an aircraft that thought for itself. She never let Sarah forget that she'd been the first person to fly the impossible aircraft. 20 months.